Hello, and welcome to episode 23 of season 6 of Dualistic Unity. I am starting this one off because I figured, why the fuck not? And I think that that's a great way to embody where I'd like to start today's episode because I really don't know what to do next. And that's always been true. Regardless of what I've convinced myself, the fact is that I never really knew what impact I was going to have by choosing any one direction. I just convinced myself I did, because the reality that I didn't was deeply uncomfortable for me, because it meant I didn't have any control. And so it can be so tempting as you start to let go of that sense of control to think to yourself, oh man, I feel like I'm just losing my mind. But the very mind you think you had was the source of your suffering. So maybe it's not that bad.
That is such a fantastic point because I've said that, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 in my head a million times in the last month. And yet it's if it is the source of that, or it tends to be, then what am I afraid of losing? Like what is this experience where maybe what if I did lose my mind? Like what would be left? My sense of my me? Just me? Like what would I be losing? My sense of control? Well, there's no control. There's no certainty. My sense of certainty. It's like, is it my sense of control or my idea that even exists that's always kind of gotten in the way of what's going on? I don't know, but I'll stop talking now because we have an awesome guest, Sophie. She's one of the co-hosts of Life Unpotted. She is a incredible person, good friend of the podcast, shares all sorts of things from authenticity, being yourself, just expressing what she's going through, which is all you can ever all you can ever do. And I'm very excited for this chat. Sophie, and I did want to say Life Unpotted just before we get into it. I've been doing some what's it called? Market analysis, competitive analysis. And like there's no podcasts that I've come across that are really that close to dualistic unity. It hit me right before this call that I think Life Unpotted is one of the closest to dualistic unity because it's just you and Daisy sharing your experience, expressing yourself. You're not trying to give people answers. You're not trying to tell people the right thing to do because we don't even know what the next thing to do that's best for ourselves. Then how the fuck are we going to tell anyone else? Like, I got enough going on that I'm going through, working through the thought of thinking that I know what's best for someone else when I don't even know for myself is fascinating. So anyway, Sophie, how you doing?
Excited to be here and chat with you guys. Yeah, it's interesting because I definitely was inspired. Daisy and I were definitely both inspired by Dualistic Unity when we first started podcasting. So it's been an interesting journey to like everything I've learned from you guys to then create our own platform and go from like the point of like I've been really realizing it felt like to start doing it, I was like, we were kind of like taking what we learned and then to see the process of like letting go of what we've learned from, I guess, dualistic unity, and then letting it be embodied in Daisy and Sophie and in our expression of it. So that's been a really cool process because it's like you see the layers like unfolding, and that's where I feel like the creative process or just a process of expression, because everything's creative, it gets deeper and deeper and almost more relaxed in it because you're not I'm not acting anymore of like I feel like there was almost a fear when I used to sit down the podcast that I didn't know what to say. Like that my voice like it's not valuable, I don't know what to say, like where's this conversation gonna go? And I feel like the more that I just be myself, the more I see and understand exactly the point of the conversation, which I think makes it like a lot more easy to trust it. But maybe when I first started, there was a part of me that knew I wasn't completely being me and I didn't know how to be me. And that's really what the fear was. It wasn't that if the podcast content was going to be good, but could I just show myself and really be me? And then what would people think? So yeah, excited for this conversation. Pumped and feeling pumped for the retreat 3 weeks from like next weekend. Because that would be my third retreat I've been going on. And I would just say anyone listening out there, the D retreat definitely was changed my life in the sense of like going there and being there. So gotta plug that real quick because I'm like fucking pumped. And it's like I tell everyone about it. I'm like, yeah, I went on this retreat. They're like, what? I'm like, we did mushrooms, and they're like, what else did you do? I'm like, that's it. And I'm always like telling people about it. Oh, but yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to hang out with you in California, and it's nice to have you on the podcast. I wanted to go back to something that you said there because I liked the way that it was phrased, and when you look at it, it's really important. Um, you can have a podcast about sports. You can have a podcast about a hobby modeling. You can have a podcast about, being a medical professional. You can have a podcast about any topic whatsoever. And you can do so from a point of view of preparation and research, where you are imparting information. And that has nothing to do whatsoever with, how much you're being yourself, so much as how much you're paying attention to the information you're bringing across. But when you're having a conversation about being yourself, when the topic is, in fact, being yourself, the very act of being yourself is what informs it. The challenge of being yourself is what informs it. And so it's almost a conversation that you cannot have to any great degree of depth without being willing to put yourself at risk and be yourself. And so hosting a podcast like Life Unpotted in itself is an act of faith, because you have to put yourself in that mentality in order to impart anything whatsoever. And so it's so very interesting how the choices you've made in your life have brought you to an environment where you get to do exactly what you want to do.
And that's always been what you've wanted to do, at least for myself. Like it's always been, it's like, what could I possibly think of that's more important to me than being myself? Like convincing someone else of something, sharing something. And so having a podcast where all you can ever do, like the preparation is not preparing, and like being okay with that. Like, and facing the discomfort of not preparing, of not being so ready. And actually, if the more you prepare, the more you fuck shit up. But there's a fear there that almost you have to like cross that, or at least face it. Cause like, and we face that all the time. We face that like moment to moment, episode to episode, day to day, decision to decision. It's like we never know. We never actually know what to say. It's almost like preparation's just kind of fucking that up. It's like fucking up the flow. And because I've always had the perspective like, oh, you got to, prepare to the degree that you feel comfortable. And that's kind of hitting different recently. It's like, is it just to make me feel comfortable? And like, but it still doesn't mean that it's fucking up the flow, but is me preparing the flow? It's like also that, but it's like how much is that getting in the way? Because it's like a stale sort of thing. Like if I prepare, it's like a stale insight from me trying to have control of something. And so I've had a lot of shifts in trying to, control and prepare for things. I used to like fucking write everything in every thought in my notebook, and I don't so much anymore. So I have a question, or I can just pass it to Sophie.
Can I just say, it's almost like when you're preparing, you're just like expressing fear. So it's like you can't get to the point you want to get to of like that true, like what that true, like that fucking like beautiful flow that comes out like when you're writing a book, or like everything's coming out of you. You can't prepare for that. But we hate that because it means we have to jump into the pool of not knowing. So it's like I've had this feeling in my gut so many times where like I'm about to jump into a pool, or like when the light's going from green to red when I'm driving, and I don't know if I should stop. And like I had this like pit in my stomach of like, oh, like I don't want to get ran over, but I don't know. Like it's like that like 5-second feeling of like fucking like extreme. I don't know what it is, but then I make the decision, and I feel like so much of like when I first started podcasting, I was like living in that state of like, oh, like I don't know. I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. And then getting to a point now where it's like, well, you just have to keep the only way, like you just have to keep going. Like that's the only way you're gonna continue to express. So I think it's so fucking it just makes more and more sense now of like, yeah, that's why, like, and I have these moments of like, oh my God, like I'm living on savings. I moved to a new city. Like, what am I doing? And then I realize, wow, that perceived risk is fucking perceived. Like, it's not happening right now. I'm okay. In this moment, I have an apartment. I have enough money to buy groceries. I have enough money to do the things I need to do. So, like, it's almost like I start feeling like what could happen in a year or what's going to happen in whatever is what's happening now. And it's just like, everything's fucking fine. So like this fear is just like, holy shit, I'm just seeing like I've lived, especially with this transition of moving, like there's been so much states of fear and anxiety where I'm like frozen. Like I feel like I'm frozen in life of like so scared. And then recently I've been like coming out of that like in longer periods and like walking around and like smelling the fucking flowers on my in my neighborhood, like no care in the world. So it's just fucking it's a really interesting journey. It really is.
Oh yeah. I figured Ray would let me uh, run after that and the moving and whatnot, because like I made a decision a month, two ago to not move, basically. To like to move, yeah, but back to a more familiar situation. And so like I can say from the flip side, as much as you all this stuff's coming up, it's like I have stuff coming up too, but it's like almost old stuff that I can't, it's like I don't reconcile. I don't match that, but there's almost like a pull to match that again instead of, you know, the triumph. It's not triumphing, powering forward. I don't know, moving forward and like finding out what this version of me. So there's a part that I feel sort of torn. Like there's a side of me where I know I'm super different and like I'm more relaxed, I'm more changed. And it does, I do express myself in that way when it hits me that like, you know, I'm going through something. I'm like, wait a second, why am I not having fun? Like, why am I not enjoying my experience? Because like regardless of your perceived idea of the situation, it doesn't mean that there's an impact of, you know, being in a city versus not, but it's still coming from me and it's still coming from my perspective and my mentality. And so it's not like something's being done to me. I'm just kind of assuming that it is like giving power off. So even in, you know, a situation that I'm in right now, like being in New York City, like epitome of which Sophie, you've lived in for a number of years, like there is an overarching mentality. Absolutely. And so there's no way that isn't going to have impact on you. And then it's just being honest with yourself and like, why are you there? Because most people are there for a specific purpose, for a specific reason. As that makes less and less sense, it's like it doesn't make as much sense to be in that situation. And, you know, hence my move to Vancouver Island very soon.
Yeah, I always find it really interesting because, you know, life is very symbolic in a lot of ways. And when you enter into a certain environment, you are entering into being a part of that environment, whether you mean to or not, right? And so you're immediately impacted by everything going on around you. And what's interesting is that cities, you know, well, I mean, civilization as a whole, quote unquote, is very much humanity's effort to maintain control and a certain degree of security and comfort, right? But with that underlying mentality comes conflict and fear of not having control and comfort, right? And so you have immediately that mentality that's kind of impacting you and you are participating in. And the alternative is to go to smaller and smaller places where there's less and less control and more uncertainty, which is why nature very much changes your mentality. Because in nature, there's almost no comfort, there's no certainty, right? You're just out there facing the elements as nature. But in that, you're very focused on where you are and what you're doing, right? It changes your priorities. And so it's very interesting to me that almost of necessity, our mentality changes according to our environment. But that said, we also change our environment with our mentality. So, for example, living in a city isn't necessarily going to make you egotistical. But if a million people live in a city just because they want to have control over their life by having more money or having distraction or being able to live in a high rise and lord that over everybody because look how it defines them and so on and so forth, those people are not going to get along or trust each other. Right. But if you were to abandon that intention, if you were to abandon the mentality that drives it, it would just be a bunch of places that people can live in. And you could use the city totally differently. Right. Like the space would be used totally differently. There would be a recognition of the need for green spaces. There would be a recognition of the need for space to live, right? And that doesn't require you to, change the city, just change how it's used, right? And that would immediately happen if we changed our mentality. So it's always just really funny to me that things are very symbolic, but they go both ways. This is why I came back from the forest. Is because I recognized that while it's easy for me to live in the forest and just enjoy my existence, it does very little for any of you, right? Which is still me, still me. And so I come back and I integrate and I learn that this mentality, although it is heavy and it does have certain implications about your obligations to the system and society and everyone else and so on and so forth, it's optional. You don't have to believe in it just to be here. You really don't. And you can let all that shit go and just be where you are, as Sophie said. Because that's really where life is happening. But, that said, I wanted to go back to preparation because I think this is a really important thing to remember that some preparation is helpful. Like, for example, if I was to say, hey, Sophie, I challenge you to a boxing match in California, right? We're going to raise money for charity. You and I, head to head. You would likely start training, right? And because that's a smart thing to do. So that's a certain degree of preparation, right? Do you need to train? Is the question. Because how you fight is very much a reflection of who you are. So if you were to go into a fight being very clear, very attentive, just expressing who you are, the fact is you clean my clock, right? But most of what we face in a fight is our own fear. Most of what we face in a fight is our own resistance to what we're going through, our own doubt, right? And that's what we're reflecting when we hesitate, when we shy away, when we duck, when we tense up, we do all that. What we're reflecting is we're reflecting ourselves. Right. And so the preparation that you might go through before the fight is really so you can let go of that fear. Right. And so we're really just preparing. And all that means is letting ourselves go, yeah, I can do this. I can likely do this because that's what's going to change the odds of it going one way or another. So preparation it's not that it's a bad thing necessarily, but there's a point where it stops being preparation and it just starts being self-soothing. Right. And you can let that go at that point. But often we're like, no, I need to know everything that's going to happen. I need to know everything that people are going to say. I need to know everything that somebody might ask. I need to know everything that might happen after the fact. And it's like, no. What you need to know is what you intended to present, what it is you were intending on fucking saying. That's all you need to do is just do that. And then everything else plays out. Right. But we take preparation to an extreme. And it's just because it's reflective of our fear. Right. So it's not to say don't prepare, but do prepare, recognizing that part of it is understanding the environment and part of it is just dealing with the fact that you don't feel like you know what you're going to do and that it's a way of convincing yourself that you do.
You feel that? Do you think that everyone, like, as you're describing, like I'm realizing, yeah, I've had this fear of just going up and saying something for as long as I can remember. And I remember being in law school and getting called on like the Socratic method and going around and having to like fucking answer the case question in front of like 100 people. I remember being like so anxious, but I learned a lot from law school. I learned a lot from that like I wasn't so scared to speak to the whole class after that. Like I built a lot of confidence in my ability to handle different weird situations like that, or like taking the LSAT and having to and the bar exam over 2-day course. Like I had so much fucking anxiety during that time, but it taught me a lot. And I definitely feel like I have seen that throughout my life, but something like happened, I feel the past the past few years that I was been living in such a more anxious state, or I'm becoming more aware of the anxiety. Have I always been living in that anxiety? Where did that preparation start? Was it in school? The people who are homeschooled, do they still experience this fear? Like, where is this the way our brains are root? Why are we so scared to just say it? And just, and for me, I guess it's the fear of going wrong. And then that fear feels so disproportionate, you can't comprehend, oh, and then what? And that's what I've been learning now. Like, oh my God, someone's gonna see me on Instagram. I'm gonna fucking something. I like in my body, it feels like you can't even see it. It's like a black. I look into the future, I just see dark badness. And now I feel like that's been clearing off. My windshield's been clearing off, and I'm like, oh, there's just grass over there. Like, what was I so scared of? And that's kind of, I feel like what the retreat, I mean, doing mushrooms has shown to me is just I just went through a bunch of all this emotions and coming out the past 2 days. And I was like, all right, just sitting in it, not even labeling, just sitting with it. And I was like, holy fuck, this feels like 1 hour ago, I was like, I felt like I was feeling this experience of processing or admitting these feelings to myself that I have been telling myself weren't true. And I think I'm just seeing that then I how much I've denied myself from admitting that stuff to myself. They're like, oh, that was what I think happened, even if I don't even know it's what had happened, but that's I guess the idea of what has been happening. And then on that note, seeing this shift in Sophie going through all this and then realizing there is no Sophie. And it's that's what keeps fucking me up recently, because I'm just who's going through this right now? And it's I'm just watching myself go through it. And I'm like, when we're feeling all these emotions, I guess what I'm really feeling is how heavily I've invested in this idea of all this stuff that's been happening. And it's I'm crying and I'm feeling it. I'm like, wow, but when that was all happening, what if I just had allowed myself to be like, okay, what makes an event quote unquote traumatic is what I'm wondering.
Well, it would be how far it is outside of your perceived comfort zone or your perceived ability to deal with it. Right? When it's something that overwhelms you, when it's something that you cannot deal with in a healthy way, it's something that causes trauma. Because the trauma isn't what happened, it's the response that's developed as a result, right? So that's the traumatic response. The thing is just the thing, but your response is what creates the trauma. And so when you don't feel like you can deal with things, it's traumatic, which is why most trauma is childhood trauma. It's because we didn't actually have any ability to deal with or understand what was happening around us or to us, right? We didn't understand the people that were a part of it. And so it was incredibly overwhelming to the point where we had nothing to grasp for whatsoever. And so all we could do was develop some kind of a defense mechanism, some kind of a coping mechanism in order to kind of shield ourselves from it, because we had no way to reconcile it otherwise. That's why if the same thing were to happen now, it wouldn't create a traumatic impact because you would understand it. Like if somebody came over to you and they said something judgmental in the same way that a kid did when you were young, you would go, "You okay?" As opposed to, "Oh shit, you know, that means something about me." And that's that traumatic response to a very large degree, and this is why getting over trauma is letting go of the perception of it, right? Is looking at it and going, right, that was the response I learned, but that's not actually what happened. That's not actually what it is. That's just the perception of it I've taken based on how I understood it at the time. And so when you start looking back and reassessing the traumatic memories, all of a sudden it becomes a point of strength. It becomes something that you learn from, it becomes a way to empathize with more people. And it ceases to be traumatic and it starts to be the process of healing.
So can okay, so I've been processing something that happened 3 years ago with my family, and I am realizing how much I've like everything with like confronting my sexuality with my parents and like my dad saying like no. And I feel like I couldn't, like that was like so I couldn't accept it. It was so hard. So now it's like interesting. It's like, okay, as time is passing, I'm like, holy shit, like, and then going home recently and having an experience where everyone felt connected, it finally for the first time let me like see it differently because I was in more of a state of love. Like it felt like my dad was like, we were all relaxed. I was like, whoa, that's not, he wasn't embodying that pain that he was in when he was so mad. He didn't say anything about my partner, like, or, and like anything like that, but you just felt it. It's like, again, you realize the words were just things that were being said out of reactivity. And so now it's so interesting to watch the process of realizing and it's been making me trying to understand this fucking like so it feels like such a nuanced thing, like the act of our mind processing. Because to me, it feels like when I let go and I'm not thinking, I process. So could I, in theory, can you, in theory, do we need time to pass? What is time passing? Like, do we need time to pass to realize, to fully realize something? Or do we just need to accept it? Like, could I have in that moment been like, I accept this happening right now and had the same level of clarity that I do right now? It,
Obviously not,
okay,
because you didn't,
right.
right? That's the point. There's nothing wrong with where you are. I was saying this to Andrew earlier today. It's very easy to get caught up in the idea that there is a resolution where all of a sudden you're going to get to a point where you're just like, everything's fine now, right? Whereas you're dealing with relationships with people who are pivotal figures in your life. Like you are dealing with characters who were your first characters. These were foundational symbols of reality to you as you grew up in the world. And so there is a transition that happens in your relationship with them that matches the transition that happens in your relationship with yourself. As you start to change how you perceive yourself, the relationship with them changes because you'll notice that it goes along with your perception of them. Looking at yourself as a child makes you look at them as a parent. Neither of them is the case. You're both just human. You're both just what is. There is no such thing as a child and parent in terms of there being an allotted role, right? There's no script that goes with those functions. And so there's no real, I guess, idea to pin them against. And as you grow up, you realize that. You realize that the idea of you and the idea of them isn't the reality, and that changes the relationship. But we always, as we go through that, we're like, well, I just want to get to the end of that. Like, I just want to get to the point where I'm no longer dealing with this attachment issue and all that. And it's like, but that's the beauty of relationship, right? Like, the whole point is to accept them where they are and then to accept you where you are and let that process, right? And you'll notice that the entire process, quote unquote, is just the acceptance of who you are. So to answer your question, does it take time? No, it only ever happens now, right? But that said, there's a lot of now.
And there's almost it's like almost to make sense of it. There's like a side of it that's ah now I'm wondering a little bit about time playing out. But I think a part of it is just so I can make sense of like me acting how I act now and how I acted, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But like they couldn't have happened without, like, it had to be infinite variations of me now because I'm only ever now. So like I couldn't, like, what am I assuming to assume that like I get to this point where I have changed a lot more and like, oh, how much time, like your question, Sophie, like how much time does it take? Do we need time? It's like, time for what? Time for what? Like, what exactly is happening? I'm being more myself. Am I not being myself right now? Am I not holding on to something right now? Like, what is it that I'm wondering takes time? Right? Like, what am I wondering going like letting go of what? Like letting go of who? Like what time does that take? Is there a depth that plays out over time? Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's different than my opportunity to let go of my assumption that I'm doing something wrong right now, let go of my assumption that there's something I got to let go of, like that I'm on a journey, that I'm processing all of these things. It's like, yeah, it doesn't mean it's not the case, but it also doesn't mean that it's going to something. Like me now is becoming, you know, I'm now Andrew XYZ and I'm or like 1.0 getting to 2.0, getting to there's none of that. It's just I am what I am and I'm also not that all the time. And like how much am I doing to, reinforce that moment to moment? But it doesn't I guess it doesn't take time because like there's nothing to be there to take time.
But it's a trick of perception, right? Like if I think about this conversation a week from now, I'm going to look back at it and I'm going to look at how I'm responding now. And I'm going to go, I wasn't being myself. Now, where is that coming from? From the me that I am at that point. So of course I'm not being that me. I'm being this me. This is me being myself. But I'm always going to look back from myself at this and go, well, that's not this. Well, no shit. It's just the fact that we keep thinking of ourself as a stationary, static, one thing. Like, I know when I'm being myself. Are you breathing? Are you continuing to exist? Because that's it. The only thing you can get caught up in is the idea that that's a thing. Right? And that's it. And it's not that you're not being yourself at that point. It's just that you're being yourself under the impression that that's a thing. Right? You were authentically lost, is what I'm saying. And that is okay. That is still being yourself because that's what life is all about. To go back to your question actually earlier, Sophie, you had said, is this necessary? Like, where do we learn this shit about anxiety? Like, as a homeschool kid, do you go through that? And as a dad to a homeschool kid, I'll say, yeah, you do. Because it goes with the perception of being divided. Being born is a huge thing. Like, we don't really think about it, but you go from being formless to having a form within something. And that changes your perspective of everything. And worse, you were born into a tiny, useless little fucking sack of meat that can't even feed itself, that can't move around. If you leave it on its own, it can fucking suffocate by lying on its stomach. Okay, it doesn't know how to blow its nose. It doesn't understand anything that's fucking happening. It's never heard anything. It's never seen anything. And you come into the world and you're like, why am I fucking traumatized? Like, it's a lot that all of a sudden we get hammered into. And over time, through our parents and all these figures in our life, we start to develop this idea of us. And that idea of us is what's meant to help us fit into what we're perceiving, what we now recognize as not us. This feels very, very separate, right? And so we develop this idea of us and it in order to interact. And this is the stages of ego development. We do it to defend ourselves, to protect ourselves, to fit in, to find out how to stop being so fucking afraid. But we invest in it for so long that it actually becomes something that we think we are rather than something that we progressively let go of. So as soon as you have that idea of yourself, you have something that you have to defend. You have something to be afraid of, which is why we were looking at this video once upon a time of these two kids, and the one kid, his parents are like pointing at him and saying his name over and over and over again, and you could see the kid like just like starts to cry, like he just doesn't understand why his parents are like saying his name over and over and pointing at him, so he starts to feel ridiculed because whereas the next kid didn't give a shit at all, and the whole point was because he didn't identify with the name. He was just like, the fuck are you talking about? I'm gonna go do my thing. He didn't think they were talking about him because they weren't. Right? And that's the whole point, is that we take it personally. We look at it where we're like, no, this is about me. And now I have something to defend. now I'm afraid, because if I don't do the right thing, if I'm not the right person, if I'm not interacting in the right way, then I'm going to be back in fear and uncertainty and an inability to defend ourselves, right? But we don't realize that a lot of the fears that we had starting off were based on that tiny little sack of meat that we were. We couldn't even get our own food. Do you remember how long it took for us to be able to reach the fucking counters? Do you? Do you remember how it felt to look up at every single person like they were skyscrapers? Do you remember feeling that small and vulnerable? And we still feel like that, despite the fact that this has changed. I can get my own fucking cookies now. You know, I can eat my own food. I can build my own goddamn shelter. Right? And yet for some reason I'm still afraid that I'm not able to deal with the uncertainty that is life, despite having all the tools to do so. But it's because of that idea of myself that I've had since I was young.
Yeah, and I feel like it's like I'm seeing how much I just haven't had faith in myself, or I haven't trusted myself that I'd be able to handle anything, like anything. It feels like I remember when I first left my job, just like so much anxiety, even though I had a great amount of savings saved to get me to the next year. And I'm seeing that like this fear of I couldn't when I first left my job, like I couldn't even like read a book during the day. Like it's taken me probably like till like a month ago where I've actually been able to like go to a coffee shop, really relax into what I'm writing, not be really anxious, not have to check my phone. Like actually like the best analogy is like when I'm like feeling like I'm on a vacation, like that feeling of the utmost relaxation. It's taken me a really long time to feel relaxed, and I'm seeing how much that's impacting like creating stuff because all these ideas are just starting to generate now of like, oh, and I always I'm like, that's how Ray does so much fucking shit. I've always wondered how that guy's like crafting a million things at once while he's podcasting, when he's not podcasting, and like always stuff going on. And I feel like, but yeah, but I feel like I'm like, it's just seeing now that, oh, it's not that hard to come up with like what this perceived. Like I even think about how I felt like I could have been an entrepreneur and like the labels I assign to, oh, if I'm someone who starts a business, like it's like I would be embody somebody, I would become somebody as an entrepreneur or like a businessman or a businesswoman. And I'm seeing now, and obviously, like what we are both creating deviates a lot from the traditional business models or traditional of what you're going to set something up and marketing and making people think that they need something, and is rooted in no, I'm just going to be myself. And the weirdness in my mind of like, oh, I'm going to have a business about me being myself, and I used to be a lawyer, and this. I was the one who didn't even become a psychologist because I thought that wasn't prestigious enough. Like my dad was like, become a lawyer, like that's better, like you make more money. So unlearning all these labels of like what a certain job means about me, and like going around and seeing other people my age who are still working those jobs and being like, am I missing out? Like I walked by this apartment the other night, last night, and at least I saw like through, because I live in a residential neighborhood, and I saw like this group of people like they're looking around like 20s, 30s, like watching the Oscars. And I felt like I was like in one of those movies, like looking through the window, like pouting on the street. Like I was just like, that could have been me. And then I just like walks back home, and there's like, but then like it's only when I'm like thinking, do I feel that? But then like the other days I'm waking up and I'm like going on these beautiful walks and I'm vibing and I'm listening to music and I'm like writing, and it's like sunshine, and literally it's sunshine every day here, but like in my mind it feels like sunshine every day. And it's just crazy to see that like now when I fall into the moments of like I'm anxious, I'll become aware of being anxious really fast. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like all of a sudden my chest is feeling tight, or like this emotion that I perceive to be anxiety, it's like I feel it. And then I'm just like, oh right, you're worrying about something. You're thinking about something. Like how addictive thought is, and just holy shit, like coming out of living in only thought, I'm just like, that's what I lived in this whole time. Like there's like I could just actually enjoy life. It's crazy. And I feel like the other day, I felt like I was in a movie, and I'm like, right, because movies are just life being filmed. Like, there's no difference between any of the two. Like, I can feel that bliss state whenever I want to, because it just, am I thinking or am I here? So it's been really enjoyable to just be here. Like, I have felt great, even when I don't feel great. Like, yeah.
Yeah. We were yesterday on one of our calls, we were talking about just like reality versus thought, or reality and thought, and like kind of being like two train tracks all the time. Like there's what's actually happening, and then there's me processing everything that's happening. That's happening. Like they're both happening all the time. And like most of my life, I was just thinking that this was this and this was this. Like the thoughts were what was actually happening. And so there was a focus on them. There was a priority on them. There was a, desire to maintain them or protect them or hide them or share them or whatever it is, instead of it just being like, no, reality's right here. And the processing, the thoughts are going to be there. Like they're the process. They're the gears turning on the machine. And I'm just like looking at them thinking that they mean something about me, and like that they're personal, even that like who's to say they're my gears? I'm just looking at gears saying like that means something about this thing. Because in those spots, like talking about traumatic experiences and whatnot, like I've gone through plenty of things in the last year, 2 years that have probably been equally, if not more uncomfortable than past traumatic experiences, and like just different things where I would have judged the fuck out of myself for doing something or stumbling or, whatever it is. And like I don't anymore, and they don't hit in the same way because I know they don't mean anything about me. And I'll go through something and be like, oh yeah, all right. Well, there was something, but it's not even a memory anymore. Like I don't feel like I remember my days so much. And like the first part of this conversation, I don't really remember, like things were shared, things were said, but then because I'll have previous things, I'll still, in anticipation, you know, have lots of fears of certain things, fears of the unknown. But like right now, I'm saying stuff and like I don't really know what I'm saying. Like I don't know. I'm not like preparing the next thing to say. I'm just in it and we're talking and we're sharing stuff. And like, so they don't hit. Like nothing hits in the same way, but there's still, those memories of things that did hit when I thought something meant something about me, because there was that response that was like, that just said that this meant something about me. That's it. Like there's plenty of times, plenty of situations I've seen something happen to someone else and they kind of laugh it off. Like, I don't have a second thought about that. And if they don't have a second thought about that, like it doesn't really hit in the same way. So every situation, if you're just like, not that that has to be your response necessarily, but you know what I mean? You're like, you just don't take it seriously. It's not that serious. Like, not to put it like super basically, but it comes from me. And then if that's always the case and everything that I jump into and do, that's the case, then like, what's stopping me from doing the things? Like, how much of my fears are indicators of things that are just going to shift a perspective, a long-standing perspective of myself? And am I just afraid of not being able to tell myself the same story anymore? Am I just afraid of losing that sense of certainty, of certainty that I am that person that has certain concerns or fears or acts in certain ways? Am I afraid of that changing? Is that the only thing that the fear is indicating?
Yeah, I feel like I resonate with that a lot. Like looking back to like, whoa, like that version of myself and all the things I'm losing. And this whole thing of like looking back and being like, oh yeah, when I was living, doing all those things, or not even doing the things, but choosing certain perspectives and choosing certain viewpoints, like how it felt again, like it's like the mind is like, yeah, life was it looks better. It seems better, like things are better. Like I was living life and I was going to random weddings and thinking about all the dumb stuff and talking about other people to other people, and just like, now that I say that to myself, I'm like, well, that sounds like a pretty shitty life. Like, just like getting nervous all the time and talking about other people and thinking about myself so much and worrying. And now I'm like, holy shit, like I'm actually thinking about other people. And I've had this like thing I've had back and forth with me recently where like I was like, are you selfish? And trying to like, I see Andrew's head because I know we talked about this before, but like the like, are you selfish? And it's like, yeah, like I have been in many, most if not all occurrences where I can even be listening to someone could be talking to me. I'm not even listening to them. Like I'm not even listening to them. And there's been a shift where I'm like, holy shit. Like even so going home recently, I realized I've played a role in this too. Even though like so much has happened with my dad and like him rejecting me and blah 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 blah, like I played a role. I became really scared when I was around him. I couldn't trust myself to say what I really wanted to say. I got so mad that like I threw something one time. Like, and obviously I see that like, yeah, like there was no point in which I guess I had learned these skills or learned this or learned how to shift my perspective or really connected with myself to understand any of that. But I think understanding that like you are always playing a role in everything. I've even seen in like my relationship with Daisy, just like both recognizing, yep, we're alone and we're not responsible for either of each other. And that creates a whole new relationship because it's like, okay, well, we are all responsible for filling our own time and filling our own needs and to satisfy this life. So when I no longer am like, I need you to make me feel a certain way, or less vice versa, you're not looking to anything to make you feel a certain way. It gives you the ability to like enjoy things more and actually see what it's like for me to go on a walk and be like, holy shit, have I never smelt flowers before? Like they're beautiful. Like there's so much in front of me. There's so much to do. There's so much to read. There's so much to think about. Like, and I used to spend all that time just worried. Like it's really exciting to be like, I used to not be able to read a book the past like few years. I couldn't even like pick up a book. I was too anxious. And now I'm like, wow, watching the words go across the page and like learning knowledge, like just reading and hearing like I've heard it before, and just like the ability to like continue to deepen and relax into learning all this new shit. I'm like, right, it's not that hard to learn things. And going back to the entrepreneur thing, it's not that hard to start a business because you realize it just takes time. And if you don't give up, what am I worried about?
It's funny, right? Like this is something that we tend to forget. And admittedly, a part of it is youth. When we're teenagers, everything feels like the end of the world. Like we're introduced to a whole new emotional spectrum, and every decision that we make is like the first time we've made this decision. And because we're so invested in the self that we're trying to protect, right? Then every decision has huge stakes. And we go through that whole process. But over time, you start to recognize, like, right, there's going to be a tomorrow, right? Like, I'm still going to be here tomorrow. I'm still going to be here tomorrow. It's really important to recognize that. Like, you are existence. There's always going to be a tomorrow, until there's not. And then there's still going to be a tomorrow because you're still existence, right? And so after a while, you realize, like, oh, fuck, I got nothing but time. And if I'm not running on this hamster wheel in my head of trying to be something, then really, like every moment's mine. It's mine. It's not mine in terms of how do I live up to the relative relationship I have with everything else, but mine, like, no, this is me. This is my life. What do I want to do? And everything slows down because then all of a sudden, the reason that you were running past those flowers is gone. Right? It's not like you're deliberately stopping to smell the flowers because you're going to benefit from doing so, but you've slowed down enough that you're just like, oh wow, those are really nice. It's a very different thing, but it really just comes down to that recognition, like, this doesn't go anywhere. This race in my head just doesn't fucking go anywhere. And it's not that it's ever going to stop, because thank God. Admittedly, there's been numerous times where all of a sudden my brain will go, did you remember this? And I go, oh shit. I didn't remember that. But then my other part of me is like, and you're a forgetful asshole. Maybe you should be worried about your memory. How else would somebody else remember this? And just all of that. And it's like, that's superfluous. There was a part where my brain was being helpful, and then there's a part now where it's just getting carried away. Right. And that's really it. And it's just being able to recognize that there's information, and then there's information that's clouded by the illusion that it's about you. And that's when the information all of a sudden stops being a source of you learning about yourself, and it starts becoming a threat. And that's why we block out so many lessons about ourselves. But that said, I want to go back to something that we were talking about, because I always find this shit fascinating. You're not your idea of yourself, and you know that. And you're starting to learn that more and more in every interaction that you go into. And yet we go into interactions with people who very much think they are their idea of themselves, and we still think that we're interacting with them. Isn't that funny? Right? We're like, no, no, I'm just interacting with myself. Why is that person being such a dick to me? It's like, who are you talking about? And it's just because we have this perception of division, right? And so it's funny because you look back at some of the moments that you've had with your family, and you're like, well, I would have done it differently now. It's like, but you couldn't have, because you're not the you you're thinking about. You're the you that was all of them. Everybody that was involved with that is you. It's all of the process happening. Where your dad's mentality is directly appropriate to where yours is. And it's really hard to keep that in mind, because then it takes us out of that control again. We're like, but then how do I wake them up? It's like, who are you talking about? It changes the whole thing. And so you find that the best thing you can do for anybody is just go and be whatever it is you are. Right. That's why before podcasts, I just show up. Right. It's the same reason that when I'm dealing with trolls online, I just respond to them as I want to. Right. Because I know at one point I would have been like, but what's the right way to respond to them? What would be the conscious way to respond to them? What's the less divisive way to respond? All of which is conceptual. It's all just me going, I can't be myself yet. Because that self's not perfect. That self's not unifying. That self's not the ideal. Right. All of which just keeps me farther and farther and farther from what that ideal would be, which would be me without that doubt, me without that willingness to try and be something else. And so now I just respond, and I think it's really funny because people are like, "Well, this isn't very unifying." It's like, well, you're learning from it. And I always find that funny because it's not up to me to teach you, but you're going to go through moment to moment to moment. You are the active moving forward, so it's all going to inform you, right? Unless you're not paying attention. Unless you're not paying attention, which is why a buddy of mine once said, "I love being terrified. It's when I know I'm paying attention."
And it's interesting when you start expressing yourself and being more yourself, or again, what does that mean? Just like not thinking that you should cater so much to things or certain perspectives. Like how how much was always in the way of that? Like even saying that, like what was in the way necessarily? What I'm trying to get to is I was talking to someone recently, and just about moving, and like I was sharing that, I've been in New York for a while. It's always been my comfort zone, and this was a friend, and so I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about going to Vancouver Island, and business moves and just makes the most sense, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, oh yeah. And there was a side of me that thought like, some of my friends in New York might like have certain perspectives of that, but it's only my own perspective of it, my own concern or whatever, like my own shifts and changes. And so I was sharing how, yeah, New York's always been my comfort zone or felt like it. And it's just like sh trying to shift and change and just makes the most sense. And it was hitting me how me sharing that, like, I can't assume anything that they were feeling, but like this friend grew up in New York and still lives in New York. And so it was kind of hitting me how just like me sharing that could have been bringing up a lot of stuff for him. And then he was like, that's fucking dope, dude. Like you got, and I was like, yeah, I don't even know, dude. I feel like half the time my life's all over the place. And he was like, I mean, you're doing a lot more than I am right now. And it hit me in that spot that I was like, oh, everyone's going through stuff all the time. And so like the point I was trying to get across with that was like, you never know how you're impacting people, and you never know what the right thing to say or share is. But if, an underlying intention for this podcast is just to be myself and share myself, and for life is to be myself, not for a reason, again, just because there's no reason not to be. And it's the easiest thing to do because it's what I'm always doing anyway. Like, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I do that? And as I've gotten more and more honest with myself about that, it's like the reasons for not doing it start to come up. And then I'm faced with those, and faced with why, and faced with my own assumptions. Like if I had assumed that, oh, if I were to share this with this friend and they were going to feel a certain way about being in their comfort zone, because it hit me after the conversation. I was like, oh, damn, wait a second. Yeah, I think of this as my comfort zone. This is very much their comfort zone. It hit me after. But if I had made this assumption like, oh, I don't want to make them feel uncomfortable, so I'm not going to share that like this is my comfort zone, which I've done in the past throughout my life. Like I haven't shared something like that. It's like, who's that for? Like, who am I prioritizing in that? Them feeling uncomfortable by me and thinking that I have some influence or sway over that. And even the assumption that that is the case. Maybe they didn't take that in at all. I don't know. So I'm like going through all these things, like doubling down on trying to have control over a situation despite having no fucking control whatsoever. And then it comes back to me, and I'm faced with myself, and just why am I trying to? Why do I think that I have control enough to have control over them? And it's like, who am I trying to help someone? Like, what is that? So I can feel like I'm helping someone, so I can feel better about myself. And the more and more honest with yourself I think you get, the harder and harder it is to not just be yourself, because you're like, well, fuck, like there's no way to control anything ever. So like, why wouldn't I? Like, why wouldn't I just show up to the situation and see what happens? Like, who am I living for?
Well said. Absolutely. Actually, it's interesting because this is something that Sophie had brought up earlier, and I wanted to circle back to it. The idea that the psychedelic experience that we have at the retreats was instrumental to your change. I would disagree, because it was all of the change up until that point that made you willing to take this symbolic act of letting go of certainty. Because that's really all it is. As you said before the episode, I feel like I'm already tripping balls. Why do you think that is? Because you've let go of certainty. That's really all it is. And this is why mushrooms, as much as the psychedelic experience is there, a good portion of it is symbolism, which is why people become anxious before they ever have the mushrooms. Right? And it's because they know that they're about to, quote unquote, lose control or lose themselves. Shit's about to change, and their entire sense of certainty is about to go out the door. But if you think about that means that their experience of quote unquote sobriety is really just an experience of false certainty. And so it's just letting go of false certainty that makes us feel high. And by high, I mean alive. Because it's not like all of a sudden we're feeling super good. We're feeling a lot. We're feeling a lot without feeling overwhelmed by it. And that experience is life. That's living. That's when you actually feel like you're alive, instead of feeling like you're in one concept trying to get to another concept. Like it's just a thin veil over top of you that stops you from feeling anything. So I think it's very interesting because people get caught up in this, especially in spiritual conversations, like, oh, awareness, raising consciousness, we're all going to be happy and unified. It's like, you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, do you? Raising your consciousness and raising your awareness is not you being happy and full of fucking sunshine and rainbows and unicorns all the time. It's you being aware of all of it, including that it's not reality, including that it's all perception, which means you have no certainty whatsoever. But in that uncertainty, again, there's you with so much more of yourself informing you from moment to moment to moment, because you're not isolating it down to what you're afraid of or what you'd prefer. You're just feeling all of it presently, with everything just going through you and your intelligence acting accordingly, which is exactly what we're doing right now. I'm just feeling what I'm feeling. I'm opening my mouth and I'm speaking, and I'm informed by both of you, and you're informed by me. And between the three of us having this conversation, we are all changing. And that's it. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know anything else, because anything else outside of that is me just wanting to feel like I'm going to get what I want. I don't even know if what I want is what's best for me.
Yeah, when you said like you're feeling everything, but you're not overwhelmed, I feel like that really resonates with me, because I'm just thinking of like someone asked me just like, oh, you've gone through all this stuff. Like that must be really hard. And it's not. Like it's fucking freeing. It's like the most relaxed I've ever felt. And that's why it's like we confuse, or like where did this idea of like going through something, like actually going through something is hard. It's like not going through something's hard. Like resisting what's not happening. What is hard. Like, and that's what, going back to the whole, like Andrew, when you're saying like you don't want to tell your friend like you're moving to Vancouver, and like I've had these thoughts too. It's like, but that's because we're viewing them as divided. That like they are like we all, it's crazy how we all are so heavily invested in this false idea of certainty that we're so scared to break it, because we know if we have to face it to someone else, we're just facing it to ourselves, and we can't face it to ourselves. So we create all of this. And that's why, like, when I feel with being scared to share on social media, like recently I've gotten so comfortable with just sharing what I'm writing and being scared to express that, or even on the podcast, because I realize, and then all of a sudden it's like people are almost interacting with my content more, or people from my past are reaching out more that recently, like the past few weeks. And I feel like I've kind of like I'm watching me just like show me more, not the facade, not the trying to be something, not talking in a certain pitch, not trying to look a certain way when I film myself. And it's like how heavily invested, it's like me being scared of them seeing that and making them uncomfortable, is not realizing that like being comfortable is a good thing because of how fucking invested they are in, and me thinking that they're not just me. Like, wow, it's crazy. And I've been going through this concept of fucking like going, like operating in that state of like, that's me. And like being like, holy, like being completely going throughout the day and be like, whoa. And it's not even, I'm not even thinking about it because it just is. And it's like beautiful because I'm just so relaxed, and like, I don't even think about what I'm saying. And like, it's like things feel like they're flowing. But then when I start getting invested in, oh, but I don't want someone to see my Instagram post. I'm like, but who's the someone? And I realize that's where all the suffering comes from. And it's like I've been saying this a lot, like by freeing yourself, you are freeing everyone else. Because it's by us maintaining this false sense of certainty, and this perception just is what causes everything to be created, because we are society. Like that's just us. And how much we cannot realize that like when we think about our society right now, like we could all decide right now to just stop all of this. Everything. All right, guys, let's check our government structure. Let's put some Bitcoin into the system. Let's realize like what's really going on here. Like, why do I still have a dollar bill with some guy's face on it from like hundreds of years ago? And that's the importance of like just this conversation, because like it makes changes. Like I'm seeing changes being made in like left and right. Like one of my best friends is like recognizing things, and like my sister who's like 23 is like realizing all this shit. And like even my parents now, my dad's like, oh, to my sister, yeah, I haven't processed my dad dying. I've like never heard my dad talk about this like most of my life. And his dad died when he was 5, and now he's 65 and like processing it. and how much me showing him me and not being so scared of how much me letting go of him being my dad feels like it's freeing him more than I ever could have known. But I was so scared to do that because I didn't want to make him uncomfortable. But he didn't want to be in him either. And I'm seeing that. Whew, and it's insane and it's beautiful and it's just like feels like it's full of love. Like there's nothing else. And it's like feels like love is the layer that you can't permeate, you can't break. It's just like there. When you're really there, it's the one that's there. And that's the most connectedness, and you just see yourself in each other, and it's profound, really.
I would say it's like it's you always there, you know? Like, and because, love, all sorts of ideas about love, and there's definitely the side that's like, especially and with spirituality, like the pleasantry, the pleasant side of it, and with the comforts, because I've had, similar conversations with people in my own life and talking and going through conversations that aren't super comfortable necessarily, but like my aversion to those are my own discomforts. It's like I don't want to make them uncomfortable because that would make me uncomfortable. And it all comes back to me. And it makes me wonder sometimes with, the perceived impacts on things. It's like, what am I? If I'm not Andrew necessarily, if I'm everything, how am I able to why do I feel like I'm able to have control over things, including myself? Like, am I able to have control over this? Like, if what I am is not disconnected from anything, then am I closer to like just a mentality all the time? Like, am I embodying control or a perception of control? Or am I embodying relaxation? Like, what exactly am I now? And then that it's not even about things playing out in a certain way after that. It's just being that. Like the whole world is reflective of, you know, your mentality. Like the whole world you perceive is reflective of that. And so it's so vast that I couldn't possibly fathom. Well, I can because I'm doing it right now. That like it's not divided from me. It's not divided from what I embody. But if that's the case, if me just in myself relaxing, not trying to change the system, not trying to change the government, if that right there in my immediacy has some ripples, 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 and for it to make sense, maybe we perceive a timeline of it. But again, it's like, what is changing? Like, what exactly are we going from to going to? Like, it's not like not ideal to ideal. It's not like perfection. It's not like all this stuff. It's almost like right now we're trying to create perfection because we don't realize that we already are. So we got to do something to have control, to make the world perfect. This epitome of what, like what am I, what are we trying to, do? And like, when you start wondering, like, what am I trying to do with my life? Like, what am I trying to get out of life? And when you're not, when you're, as I've realized more and more, there's nothing to get out of life. It's brought me closer and closer to just my experience right now, like this moment, talking with you guys, hanging out. Like, what do I want out of this life? I want to, be myself and be relaxed. And that's what else could there be? Like, there's no other experience outside of this. There's no other thing that I'm doing ever besides this. So, like, what sort of thing am I trying to get to? What change am I trying to incur or like idealized idea? And you can't even come to an idea of a right thing to do because, like, I'm just here. Like, this is the extent of me, but it's not at all separate from anything else that is, you know, going on. So, like, where is my priority? If my priority isn't here, then there's a sense of like control that's involved in that. And so, like, the best thing you can do for anyone is not try to change them, not try to have control over them, just kind of be that, just not cater and just live your life for you, not for a reason even.
Exactly. It's funny, it's the difference between reigning in hell and serving in heaven, right? Serving in heaven just really means just not focusing on what you want in fear. It's all it is, and it's not being of service like, oh, I'm going to do what everybody wants me to do. It's just acting without that need to put yourself first. And by yourself, I mean the idea of you, because that's really the only place that those needs come from, right? Like, oh, this person said something, I need to feel better. Oh, this person said something, I need to feel more certain, and that's it. It's like, if you don't, though, if you don't need to feel better, if you don't need to feel more certain, then all of a sudden you've lost a lot of your reason to judge and compare. And if you're not judging and comparing, then your actions change. And that's it. And everybody's like, well, how do they change? No, they just do. And that's the point. It's so funny because we're talking about letting go and just being yourself as being something that is world changing, in the same way that not being yourself is world changing. See, that's the funny part about all of this, is the common denominator behind the world that we live in right now is that nobody's just being themselves. It's the common denominator. We want to tell everybody else what to do. We want to have a sense of control. We want to have a sense of who we are. We want to be able to compare and compete and, have more or less than other people, all that stuff. And it's all a result of us just focusing on this idea of ourselves. And so the most revolutionary thing you can do is just let go. And that is, oddly enough, the foundation of most spiritual teachings, and it's not because they're spiritual, but because they recognized there are patterns to this. And if you look at it, it's all just because we're taking ourselves fucking seriously that we keep ending up in a state of conflict with ourselves. And then people are like, oh, they're talking about unity. That's very spiritual. It's like, no, they're just talking about the fact that you make ripples based on how you see things. Right? That's it. And if we're all sharing a collective delusion, then we're making ripples within that delusion. And then we wonder why we suffer. And the only thing you can do is you can't walk around shaking other people, because the fact that you see them as other people is part of the delusion. All you can do is just go, oh, fuck, it's me. And immediately a part of the delusion has faded and dissolved. And that changes the environment for everyone. But it really just comes down to recognizing it and letting go. Now, that said, we're going to come up to the end of this episode very shortly. And ordinarily, I would ask our guest a question, give them something, in terms of like a starting point. Where would you like to go from this question, as it were? But I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to say, Sophie, what would you like to say?
Um, how much time do I have left? Are we ending soon?
No, you go nuts.
First I was thinking, like, on so many podcasts, like if I was to like not like on the notion of like being like changing the world, just saying what you really see, like actually see. Like I've been so scared to say what I think or what I actually see. Like, and I think of how like, there could be a podcast where like I think of, or you get on there and it's like I would never just speak up. Like I would never not just say what's actually on my mind or be like, I actually don't feel aligned with, not that I don't feel aligned with the question you're asking me, but I think of like a job interview. Like when I used to like, when I was in law school and getting ready to work at like a big law firm, like how much I changed myself, like literally changed myself. Let me go shop and get this kind of clothes, or let me make sure when I'm going to the interview, I'm coming off a certain way and wanting to be prestigious and being around like that crew and like that group of people, just like how much and then I look back to photos of me as a kid, like skateboarding and just chilling out with my brother and the boys and just like playing sports. And I even see now in my life, like, wow, I feel like my life, like my actual life, it's expanding. Like I'm doing more things. Like Daisy and I were out there tonight and we were playing pool and we're talking about the DRT. I was like, yeah, Ray takes those games so damn seriously. And I'm like, yeah, because he's just actually playing the game. Like I feel like for so much of my life, like I couldn't just play pool. Like I couldn't just do these things. Like I was so anxious. Am I playing right? Like I couldn't just let go and like have fun. And now it's like dancing more. Like it's just like And I like the whole thing. It's like, yeah, the point of this conversation is to just learn how to have fun. And like, that's why the retreats, like, that's what we just do, just hang out. And it's like, you think about how so much like this a mentality of being adult is like instilled in like the work we do. And like, I've seen not working for somebody else. I'm like, man, like, wow. Like I've had to, I didn't have to, but I elected to change myself out of fear of not getting the job. And it's just like, I see how much that even kept me. Like, I remember being like, oh, like I want to work at a corporate law firm. Like, I did corporate real estate, which honestly, I enjoyed it. Okay. Like, I really did enjoy some parts of it. I gotta say, I think I like to convince myself now, I'm like, oh, you fucking hated all that. Like, no, I actually liked like being on the deals. Like, it was fun because when there was a times where I was relaxed and I enjoyed working with people and I enjoyed being on it. Like, everything's interesting when you're not thinking about it. Nothing's inherently like, oh, corporate's just the fucking idea that you have about it. And it's just like, no, I find that stuff really interesting. I read articles about real estate still because I want to be informed about reality. Like, and I think that's just what I've seen is like, I don't know, I really have invested so much into like being a lawyer and this role of being so serious. And I look back in those years, I'm like, I don't even think I was like dancing ever or singing. I think I stopped having fun. And now recently it's like more than ever. I feel like a kid again, just like dancing my way through and like just and all the things I think about like when I saw those people in the past or like if anyone started doing that at work, like so serious. You have to be so serious. And I was looking at the definition or the root of professionalism the other day, and I was just like, where did this originate? And I forgot because I was like skimming it. And I think it said something like, yeah, to the point of like being focused. But I think it said something like it's been around for a really long time. Like talk about like medieval times or like the idea of being professional. And it's like so many concepts have evolved to just change ourselves. And it's just like it feels really good now to want to have a career where I'm just me. And learning that, yeah, that can be lucrative and that can be, you can make money from that. And it's, I think, really exciting to realize that because the same person who thought being a psychologist was not as prestigious as a lawyer, realizing like, yeah, I could be a kayak instructor and make money and just be just as content on this life. You know, the guys in the suits who I admired of like being prestigious and the wealth and like, it's like, I thought those people were happier. I really thought that those people had a happier life. And now I'm waking up to the fact that like, whoa, like, no. Like there's a lot of fucking resistance and misery there. And I don't need to, and I am finally comfortable with saying, yeah, if I have a podcast and I'm writing, or like Daisy saying like a poet, like writing poems. Like I think back in the day, if I went on a date with a guy who's a fucking poet, I would never be interested. I wanted to date like investment bankers only. And it's like, what does that say about what I was looking for or how many people you could rule out because you're only going to date a certain type of person or be friends with a certain type of person? And it's like, wow. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
And it makes me wonder how much of yourself are you ruling out? All those people that you can or can't interact with. Because if I can't interact with a poet, what side of me that wants to write some poetry am I fucking suppressing, subduing? And if I'm doing that and I don't want to admit it, I'm gonna have to judge a poet. I have to. Have to. But Sophie, always a fucking blast. We'll be seeing you in 1 month from today. 1 month from today,
Eh,
April 11th. Fucking stoked for it. This has been a blast. I know
so
this will be
fast.
a lot of fun. Oh yeah, this month is gonna go quick. I'm sure. I have no doubt. But yeah, and I'll pass it to Ray. But before I do you want to just share where people can find it? I know you're on all over social media now. Been loving the stories and the authenticity with them. I watch as many as I see them come up and the podcast and whatnot.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. Check out my podcast, Life Unpotted, for more conversations like these, because that's all we're really trying to do. I host it with my girlfriend Daisy, and we're just plugging away at seeing what happens in life when you let go, and it's exciting journey to be on. And yeah, this has been a really fun conversation. Like, damn.
Oh, it's always a blast having you around to have a chat with us, Sophie. We really appreciate it. Of course, Sophie actually was one of our original Patreon supporters, and so we've been chatting with Sophie forever. But I wanted to mention quickly because I've been around for a while, as I've said many times, and I've seen a lot of different trends and fads over time. And I find it so interesting that so many of them are rooted in either just trying to feel better or trying to feel in control, that there is this undercurrent that has formed in terms of there just being disillusion with either of those options. And there is this trend growing where it's just awareness of authenticity and the power of authenticity. Not power over others or power over your life, but actually just feeling your own goddamn power in yourself. And so it's exciting when I hear Life Unpotted because I can hear that trend developing. And it's exciting for me as a person to watch it grow. And I really look forward to seeing how this conversation continues to grow and continues to expand. And eventually we all just start to take it in even just a little shade deeper. You can be yourself, and that's enough. So I'm looking forward to hanging out in California. Everyone, thanks for joining us. This has been a fun episode as always, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, everyone.
Woo!
That was dope.
Ooh,
Thanks,
Yeah.
Sophie.
that was awesome.